He wanted to be a CEO in a suit, but his empire was built on blood. And when you forget where you came from, the streets remember for you. June 26, 1915, Bensonhurst, Brooklyn. In a cramped tenement apartment that smelled like sawdust and raw meat, Giuseppe and Concetta Castellano welcomed their son into the world. They named him Constantino Paul Castellano, a name he would later shorten to C. Paul Castellano, because he hated Constantino so much. His father was a butcher, not just any butcher. Giuseppe was an early member of the Mangano crime family, the organization that would one day evolve into the Gambino family. Young Paul grew up watching his father cut meat by day and collect numbers racket receipts by night. This wasn't a normal childhood. This was an apprenticeship. By the time he was a teenager, Paul had dropped out of school after 8th grade. Books weren't going to teach him how to survive in Brooklyn. But his father taught him everything: how to butcher a carcass, how to collect gambling debts, how to keep your mouth shut when cops came asking questions. In July 1934, at just 19 years old, Paul Castellano was arrested for the first time in Hartford, Connecticut, for robbing a haberdasher. The cops dragged him into the station and demanded names. Who were his accomplices? Who else was involved? Paul stared at them in silence. He didn't say a word, not a single name. He took the fall alone and served 3 months in prison. That silence? It was his audition for the mob, and he passed. But Paul Castellano had one advantage that most Brooklyn street thugs didn't have: family connections. His sister Catherine had married a cousin named Carlo Gambino in 1932. And Carlo was destined to become one of the most powerful mob bosses in American history. In 1937, Paul married his childhood sweetheart, Nina Mano. They had 3 sons and a daughter. To the outside world, he looked like a regular family man, a butcher running a business, raising kids, living the immigrant dream. But behind the meat counter, Paul Castellano was learning the real business: organized crime. In the 1940s, Paul Castellano officially joined the Mangano crime family, the predecessor to the Gambino family. He started as a soldier, but his business mind set him apart. While other mobsters were breaking legs and hijacking trucks, Paul was studying margins, routes, and profits. He didn't just want to steal, he wanted to build. Under boss Albert Anastasia, the infamous Lord High Executioner who ran Murder Incos, Castellano rose to the rank of Capo Regime, captain. He controlled his own crew, managed rackets, and earned respect through intelligence rather than violence. But the mob is never stable. In 1957, Anastasia was assassinated while getting a shave in a Manhattan barbershop. Carlo Gambino, Paul's brother-in-law, took over as boss, and Paul Castellano, he became one of Gambino's most trusted capos. November 1957, Appalachian, New York. Law enforcement raided a massive meeting of mob bosses from across the country. Castellano was one of 61 high-ranking mobsters arrested. He refused to cooperate, got convicted of contempt of court, and served 7 months in prison. But that arrest made him famous. In the underworld, going to prison and keeping your mouth shut was a badge of honor. Throughout the 1960s and 1970s, Castellano built his empire. He wasn't flashy like other mobsters. He didn't start wars or make headlines. He ran legitimate businesses, poultry distribution companies, meat processing plants, and used them to launder mob money and control labor unions. He also got into the concrete business. His son Philip ran Scaramix Concrete Corporation, which had a near monopoly on Staten Island. Castellano joined the Concrete Club, a mob-run cartel that controlled all major construction contracts in New York between $2 million and $15 million. Contractors paid a 2% kickback to the commission, and Castellano supervised the Gambino family's cut. This wasn't street-level crime anymore. This was corporate racketeering. Castellano also controlled Teamsters Union Local Chapter 282, which provided concrete workers for every major building project in New York and Long Island. If you wanted to build anything in New York, you had to pay the mob. And if you wanted to pay the mob, you had to go through Paul Castellano. By the mid-1970s, the Gambino family was generating hundreds of millions of dollars annually. And when Carlo Gambino died of natural causes on October 15th, 1976, at age 74. Everyone expected underboss Agnello Della Croce to take over. But Carlo Gambino had other plans. On his deathbed, he named Paul Castellano, his brother-in-law, as his successor. The crown passed, but not everyone bowed. Paul Castellano didn't just want to be a boss, he wanted to be untouchable. And in 1976, shortly after becoming head of the Gambino family, he began construction on a monument to his power. A sprawling 17-room mansion on Tot Hill, Staten Island, the highest point on the east coast south of Maine. The mansion was completed in 1980 at a cost of over $3.5 million. But this wasn't just a house, it was a statement. Designed to resemble the White House in Washington, D.C., the estate featured a pillared portico and circular driveway, with a fountain Carrara marble imported from Italy, lining the foyer and dining room. An Olympic-sized swimming pool, an English garden with manicured lawns, a bocce ball court, 8 bedrooms and 17 bathrooms, a 13-car garage, bulletproof windows, 5 secret escape routes, a hidden ladder leading to an underground tunnel. Mobsters started calling it the White House. The FBI called it the same thing, and Paul Castellano, he loved it. But here's the problem. While Paul was walking around his mansion in velvet slippers and expensive dressing gowns, his capos were out on the streets making money, breaking bones, and risking prison. And Castellano, he stopped showing up. He stopped meeting his soldiers in smoky social clubs. Instead, he held meetings in his dining room, surrounded by marble and chandeliers, while his men waited outside in the cold. Worse, to pay for his lavish lifestyle, Castellano began demanding 15% cuts from his capos, up from the traditional 10%. His men were struggling to make ends meet, and their boss was demanding more while living like royalty. One capo, Tommy Gambino, ran a garment trucking business. Another, Jimmy Failla, controlled garbage hauling. They made millions, but Castellano wanted his piece. Always. And if you complained, there were consequences. In 1975, Castellano allegedly had Vito Borelli, his own daughter's boyfriend, murdered because Borelli had compared him to Frank Perdue, the chicken magnate. The insult? Castellano looked like the Perdue Farms mascot. That's how thin-skinned he was. That's how dangerous his ego had become. Paul Castellano had one ironclad rule: no stuff, no dope, no powder. He believed trafficking narcotics brought too much heat from the feds. It was bad for business. And anyone caught dealing would be killed. But here's the problem. Stuff and dope were insanely profitable. And in the 1980s, young mobsters like John Gotti saw an opportunity. John Gotti was a Queens-based capo and protege of Agnello Della Croce, the underboss who should have been boss instead of Castellano. Gotti was charismatic, violent, and ambitious. He had his own crew operating out of the Bergen Hunt and Fish Club in Ozone Park, and they were making money hand over fist. But Gotti's crew had a problem. They were dealing dope. In August 1983, Gotti's close associate Angelo Ruggiero and Gotti's brother Gene were arrested for dope trafficking. The FBI had wiretapped Ruggiero's house and recorded dozens of conversations about moving powder and dope. Castellano demanded transcripts of the tapes. He wanted to know who was involved, who was talking, and whether his ban on narcotics had been violated. Ruggiero refused, and Castellano threatened to demote John Gotti. That was his first mistake. Then came the second. The FBI bugged Castellano's mansion. In 1983, federal agents obtained a warrant and waited for Castellano to leave for Florida. They drugged his guard dogs, disabled his security system, and planted listening devices in his dining room and living room. For months, the FBI listened to everything: murders, extortion, kickbacks, stolen cars, prostitution rings, all of it recorded in Castellano's own voice. On March 30th, 1984, Castellano was indicted on federal racketeering charges, along with extortion, stuff trafficking, theft, prostitution, and the murders of Detective Anthony Eppolito and mobster Roy DeMeo. He was released on $2 million bail. In February 1985, he was arrested again, this time as part of the Mafia commission trial, a massive federal case targeting the bosses of all 5 families. Bail, $3 million. By late 1985, Paul Castellano was facing life in prison, and everyone knew it. He was going to jail, or he was going to flip. Either way, John Gotti couldn't let him live. December 2nd, 1985. Agnello Della Croce, the Gambino family's underboss and John Gotti's mentor, died of cancer. He was 71 years old. Della Croce had been the bridge between Castellano and the street-level mobsters. He kept the peace. He protected Gotti. Now, he was gone. And Castellano? He didn't even attend Della Croce's wake. That was the final insult. Castellano then revised his succession plan. He appointed Thomas Bellotti, his personal bodyguard and chauffeur, as the new underboss. Not a seasoned capo, not a respected earner, his driver. Castellano also started making plans to break up Gotti's crew and demote him for the dope dealing. John Gotti saw the writing on the wall. If I don't kill him, he'll kill me. So Gotti made a decision. He was going to violate the most sacred rule in the mob. You don't kill a boss without commission approval. But Gotti didn't care. He was done asking permission. He recruited a hit team, Salvatore Scala, Edward Lino, and John Carneglia as the shooters, Dominic Pizzonia, Angelo Ruggiero, and Tony Rampino as backup, and Capo Frank DeCicco, Castellano's trusted associate, tipped Gotti off about a dinner meeting. December 16, 1985, Sparks Steakhouse, 210 East 46th Street, Manhattan. 5:30 p.m., the Christmas season. Midtown Manhattan packed with shoppers and tourists, and Paul Castellano was about to die. December 16, 1985. 5:26 p.m. A black Lincoln pulled up in front of Sparks Steakhouse. Inside were Paul Castellano, 70 years old, and his newly appointed underboss Thomas Bellotti, 45. They were meeting Capo Frank DeCicco for dinner to discuss family business. What they didn't know, Frank DeCicco had betrayed them. John Gotti and Salvatore, Sammy the Bull Gravano sat in a car across the street watching. Gotti held a walkie-talkie. When Castellano's car pulled up to the red light, Gotti gave the order. Now. 4 men in black trench coats and Russian fur hats stepped out of the shadows. Salvatore Scala, Edward Lino, John Carneglia, all carrying handguns and revolvers. As Castellano exited the car, the gunman opened fire. 9 shots. Rapid succession. Castellano was hit multiple times in the head and torso. 1 bullet entered through his right eye and exited through the back of his skull. He collapsed onto the sidewalk, blood pooling beneath him. Thomas Bellotti tried to react, but the gunman turned and shot him as he exited the driver's door. He died instantly. The assassins fled on foot, disappearing into the crowded Manhattan streets. No one tried to stop them. Witnesses scattered. Shoppers screamed. And John Gotti? He calmly drove past the bodies to confirm the kill. Then he drove away. Paul Castellano, the boss of bosses, the man who ran a $500 million a year criminal empire, was dead on the sidewalk outside a steakhouse, his eye 15 feet away on the pavement. Within minutes of Castellano's death, Gotti's men took over the Gambino family. There was no vote, no discussion. It was a coup. On January 15, 1986, at a meeting of 20 capos, John Gotti was formally elected boss of the Gambino family. He appointed Frank DeCicco as underboss and Joe Gallo as consigliere. Gotti became an instant celebrity. The press nicknamed him the Dapper Don because of his expensive suits. He threw lavish parties. He walked the streets like a king. And for a while, he seemed untouchable, earning the nickname the Teflon Don after beating multiple federal cases through witness intimidation and jury tampering. But not everyone was happy. Vincent the Chin Gigante, boss of the Genovese family, was furious. Gotti had violated the most sacred rule. You don't kill a boss without commission approval. Gigante personally ordered Gotti's assassination. On April 13, 1986, a car bomb exploded outside a Bensonhurst social club where Gotti was supposed to be. But Gotti was late. The only casualty? Frank DeCicco, Gotti's underboss, and the man who'd betrayed Castellano, was blown apart. The streets had collected their debt. Only after Gotti survived did Gigante relent. Gotti was now the most powerful mob boss in America. And for 6 years, he ruled the Gambino family with an iron fist. But in 1990, the FBI finally caught him. Using wiretaps from the Ravenite Social Club, federal prosecutors heard Gotti discussing murders, extortion, and Castellano's assassination in his own voice. And then came the final betrayal. Sammy the Bull Gravano, Gotti's underboss and closest ally, flipped and became a government witness. On April 2, 1992, John Gotti was convicted on 13 counts, including the murders of Paul Castellano and Thomas Bilotti. He was sentenced to life in federal prison without parole. On June 10, 2002, John Gotti died of throat cancer in a Missouri prison hospital. And Paul Castellano? He was buried in Moravian Cemetery on Staten Island. The Archdiocese of New York refused to grant him a Catholic funeral, citing his notorious life and death. Paul Castellano's assassination changed the Mafia forever. It proved that even the most powerful boss could be killed if he lost the respect of his men. It showed that the old rules, loyalty, omertà, commission approval, were crumbling. Castellano ran the Gambino family like a corporation. He focused on white-collar crimes, construction kickbacks, stock fraud, money laundering. He wanted to move away from violence and into legitimate business. But he forgot one thing. The mob is built on blood. And if you forget that, blood will remind you. His men resented him. He lived in a mansion while they worked the streets. He demanded 15% cuts while they struggled. He refused to attend Della Croce's wake. He promoted his chauffeur over seasoned capos. He lost touch. And in the mob, losing touch is a death sentence. Castellano allegedly had over 30 men killed during his reign. He ordered the murder of Roy DeMeo in 1983, his body found shot to death in the trunk of a Cadillac. He killed Vito Borelli for comparing him to a chicken mascot. He ran prostitution rings, loan sharking operations, and stolen car networks. But he wanted to be seen as a businessman, not a gangster. That was his fatal mistake. Today, his mansion still stands at 177 Benedict Road on Staten Island. It's been renovated and is currently listed for sale at $18 million, the most expensive home in Staten Island history. It has 8 bedrooms, 17 bathrooms, a home theater, a wine cellar, a sauna, and that 13-car showroom garage. But the bulletproof windows are gone. The secret escape routes have been sealed. The Oregon building, where Castellano's personal suite once stood, was demolished in 1993. The White House remains, but the king is dead. He wanted to be a CEO. He built an empire on kickbacks and concrete. He lived in a palace and demanded respect. But he forgot the most important rule. In the mob, you can't run the streets from a mansion. The moment you stop walking with your soldiers, they stop following you. And Paul Castellano? He stopped walking, so they stopped following. And on a cold December night in Manhattan, outside a steakhouse packed with Christmas shoppers, the streets came for him. 6 bullets, 1 message. You can't be a boss if you forget where power comes from. And power? It doesn't come from marble floors and velvet slippers. It comes from blood, loyalty, and fear. Paul Castellano forgot that, and John Gotti reminded him.